Hello, everyone. I am really excited to share this episode with you. I think it is so special when we get to hear people's stories of how they both experience medical trauma and they've also been able to go on a healing journey and start to feel better. But sometimes when these stories are shared, there are details of the story that can be disturbing to listeners. And so I wanted to let you know that there are aspects of Deborah's story that could be triggering because she does go into some detail about what happened in her medical experience. It was traumatic for her. If you do choose to listen and you find yourself triggered, know that you can always take a break and that you can do some slow breathing. I often talk about straw breath. That's breathing in for a count of 4 through your nose and out your mouth for a count of 6 to 10, whatever feels best for you. So, if you feel ready to listen to the podcast, I hope that you enjoy it and remember to take care of yourself. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Medical Trauma Support Podcast. Today I have Deborah here with me, and I am super excited to have you here, Deborah, because you have a really amazing and beautiful story, and I'm really thankful that you're going to share it.
Right. Well, good morning, everybody. And I'm a Canadian, so I'm coming to you from Canada. So just wanted to let you know that I'm in the middle of Canada in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And to get right into my story, I suffered from diverticulitis quite severely. And the summer before last, and I decided that I needed to do something about it. I was continually on antibiotics, and being that I am allergic to penicillin, it limits my antibiotics a great deal. So I didn't like the fact that I was on antibiotics for so long and so much, and virtually every weekend that summer was in the hospital. And I knew I couldn't continue on like that. It wasn't a very good quality of life. So I opted for having a sigmoidectomy, where they simply take your colon and cut out the sigmoid portion of the colon, which is kind of the little S portion at the bottom of your large colon. And what would happen with that, it would be a laparoscopic done robotically, and I would have 4 little incisions. I would wake up and the world would be great. Mm-hmm. Life is not perfect. I did wake up. I had that surgery, and I was about 4 hours post surgery when I said to the nurse, something has snapped, something has let go, or something is completely wrong within me, because I started to balloon to twice my size. My breathing was getting labored because of all the fluid in there. My lungs were collapsing. Now that I know that later, that's what was happening. And what had happened was the portion that they put together of my large colon simply, it did not leak. It burst open. And that's putting all my fecal matter into my abdominal cavity and causing sepsis. I went into septic shock. I went to the hospital. Well, first they had to do another surgery. I was in a small country hospital, well, 100 beds or so, but a smaller town outside of Winnipeg, and they called the air ambulance for me, which is a helicopter, and they do it in very severe cases where people don't have any hope any other way. And there's a doctor and a nurse on board, and they can keep you intubated on board. And it's a 17-minute flight to where I was going. And they called, and there was a horrendous storm. It was snowing. This was on November the 16th. And there was a terrible snowstorm. And so they said no. They dispatched a ground ambulance for me with a doctor on board. And that wasn't going to work either. So I went into surgery. They said, you need to do what I call my life-saving surgery. And my life-saving surgery is when they opened me up from right under the breast line down to my pubic area, and it's about a foot incision. And they removed from me the organs they could and put them aside, and they washed and they washed and they washed because I was severely septic and not a good chance of survival. And so
Mhm.
that was the only way they knew how to get this infection out of my body quickly. And of course, copious amounts of antibiotics going in my body at the same time. So
Mhm.
I did survive that surgery, which nobody figured that I would. And they told my children that the weather had cleared and there was a window where I could get the helicopter. And
Mhm.
so they dispatched the helicopter to me in that 20-minute window of clearing. And they came to get me into this other small remote hospital where I was. And they told my children, I have 4 grown children, and they told my 4 children that your mom has a 1% chance of survival and a
Mhm.
1% chance of making it into Winnipeg.
Mhm.
And that was pretty harsh for anybody to hear. Um, my children
Yeah.
were devastated. My husband was devastated. My, friends, anybody who knew me was devastated. I'm glad I wasn't awake for it because I was already in a coma.
Mhm.
And I did make the 17-minute flight to Winnipeg, and I arrived at St. Boniface Hospital in Winnipeg, which is a large teaching hospital. And they immediately put me into ICU, where I spent the next week on life support.
Mhm.
Still, my chances of survival were not great. And again, I'm thankful I wasn't awake to know anything
Mhm.
about it at that point in time.
Mhm.
Um, Later on in my recovery in ICU, and this is where my medical trauma comes in mostly, is the
Mhm.
fact that I was awake in my mind, yet I could not move my body. I could not indicate to anyone that I was awake in there. And
Mhm.
they were doing things to me. Like, that sounds evil. They weren't doing anything bad. They were just taking care of me and administering drugs and turning me and doing all these different things that they do. And it was hurting me. And I
Mhm.
had no way of telling them that. So
Yeah.
that was horrific.
Yeah, that sounds like so, yes, horrific.
Yeah,
Um,
it was
and
not.
I want to offer a moment for both us and the listeners just to take a little pause and take a breath because this is really hard stuff. I mean, this is what medical trauma is. It's really hard.
Yes.
And so, for anyone listening or watching, if you just want to take a minute, and I'll lead us, and Deborah, feel free to join for this draw breath, but I'm going to lead us through just a little bit of a relaxing breath because let's just take a minute to connect, and take a breath because that's real and that's intense. And so, straw breath is a technique that I use frequently where I'll breathe in my nose for a count of 4 and breathe out my mouth for a count of 6 to 10. You just want that out breath to be longer. So, let's do a
Mm-hmm.
couple. Thank you for sharing your story so far, Deborah. I know that is a really intense experience.
Yeah, it was. The month I spent in the hospital, I went through 23 IV starts,
Hmm.
um, numerous procedures, and my incision got infected, which is no surprise. My whole body was infected. And so I had a hole in my stomach that they were packing, and they did pack for months after I left the hospital.
Hmm.
So, yeah, all in all, it was very traumatic. And
Mhm.
I have now been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder,
Yes.
and high anxiety, which no surprise.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I think like for people listening to understand that that is the like common and normal response to going through something so terrifying.
Yeah.
Because I think oftentimes we can feel this sense of like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way. Well, of course you feel that way, right? Of
Hmm.
course, that was a really scary thing to go through.
Yes.
Um, yeah, and I know whenever you're ready to talk about it, you and I have talked before, and you shared some of the things that you've done and are doing to help yourself feel better.
Hmm.
I don't want to cut off your story. So,
Okay. Well, there's another element to my story.
mhm,
And the element is that I was coming off of the intubator,
mhm,
which is a tube down your throat, which in essence breathes for you.
mhm,
And they were trying to get me extubated. And every
mhm,
time they would turn the machine down, I would stop breathing
mhm,
and they would have to turn it back on. And the sooner I got off of the ventilator, the better I would be, because
mhm,
it's harder and harder to get off the longer you're on it.
mhm,
So, time was of the essence. They really wanted me off of this. And I don't recall this, but my two of my children, I had one on each side, and they were holding my hand. And each time I would stop breathing, they would squeeze my hand quite hard. I don't remember that, but they told me quite aggressively, and they would say in a very loud voice, "Mom, breathe." And I had both of them doing that from either side. And
mhm,
so they continued to try to turn down the ventilator. And they did it for 5.5 hours. My children continually did that for 5.5 hours. I have a hard time wrapping my brain around that. Um, and in that time, I had an experience that was life changing for me, in that I met with Jesus.
mhm,
I simply stood up in my mind, and I knew I can't stand up, I can't walk. And I was
mhm,
standing up, and there was a picture on the wall. And it was a picture of a beautiful man at a desk. And there was gold light streaming everywhere. And I thought, And all of a sudden, I was just walking towards him. And again, I knew I couldn't walk. So my brain kept clicking into, "You're really sick, you can't walk."
mhm,
And I went over to the picture, not walking. I can't actually tell you how I got there. It was kind of like I just thought about it and it happened. And I was there. And the closer I got to that picture, the bigger it got. And as I got really close to the picture of this man, suddenly I was in the room with him. It's like I had jumped into the picture or he had jumped into my world, but the colors are something that I wish I could explain. I've gone through um, swatches of colors of golds and things, and I cannot duplicate the color. It should have been blinding. It was that bright. And I didn't even squint. It didn't it didn't bother me at all. And
mhm,
so I kept thinking, man, this is going to hurt my eyeballs, but it didn't.
mhm.
Like it just didn't. And my
Yeah.
eyes were wide open, and he was there before me, and it was the most peaceful, tranquil, calming feeling. And he never spoke a word. I was so wishing he would say something to me. And he didn't speak. He just looked at me. He put his hand up and he went. And in my mind, I knew he's saying, "It's not your time."
Yeah.
And I suddenly came back and I was laying in my bed, and my kids were squeezing my hand, saying, "Mom, breathe." And that that was the end of my experience with him, but so not the end of it, because
Right.
I have never felt so loved. I've never
Mhm.
felt so calm. There wasn't a ripple in my being.
Yeah.
It was just serene and so bright, but beautifully bright. It didn't affect my vision. It didn't make me squint, make my eyes, dilate, and it was absolutely fabulous. It was pure peace.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing. And what I am wondering about is, like, how does that knowing and that experience now impact your life? Like, what is that like having had that experience?
hmm I Life isn't as difficult, maybe.
Mhm.
Um, like I said, I do have post traumatic stress disorder and anxiety, and that does affect my day to day living.
Mhm.
And but on the same coin, if you flip it over, I wake up in the morning and I thank Jesus for another day. Thank you,
Mhm.
I can spend time with my husband. Thank you, I can spend time with my family. Thank you, I just get to breathe another day. Like people say, take one day at a time, but I don't think they get it. I don't
Mhm.
think they really understand that concept. And it's something that you have to be aware of all the time. Just take that. For me, it's almost one moment at a time because we don't know the moments that are next.
Yeah.
We don't know what's in store for us.
Right.
So, in that way, it has changed my life. I'm a little more peaceful, I think, than I ever have been. And for me, the knowledge that I am so loved,
Mhm.
both by my husband, by my children, by my friends. I knew I was loved. We know cognitively in our brain, okay, yeah, I'm loved. I've got a husband, I've got a wife, I've got children, I've got grandchildren. I'm loved. But to feel that, to cognitively know it, and to actually feel it within your being, that love, I've had that opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's life changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's so beautiful, and I'm so thankful that you're sharing that story. I'm very moved by that. I'm very moved by that, and I think
I'm very selective. It's funny because I didn't come out of the hospital and get better and start screaming to the rooftops. I felt like I needed to be cool about it.
Mhm.
Um, I told my children right away, of course. I told my husband right away, of course. And I told a few close friends. But I've left it to God, and He's leading me to share it at certain
Mhm.
times with certain people. And it's
Mhm.
just so interesting how that works out. And people that I do share it with at those times who are saying, oh, Deborah, like, couldn't it come at a better time? I so needed that. And
Mhm.
so to see those things line up is really, I know He's still using me and working in my day to
Mhm.
day life. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to have had that experience, as you go into the process of healing, both physically and emotionally, and to have that, seems like such a gift
Right. And
to
it
take with you.
is. But
Yeah.
I'm also using medicine to help myself. And I have gone on antidepressants and anti anxiety medication to help me deal with the PTSD because that can be debilitating
Yes,
at times. And
absolutely.
I used to think post traumatic stress, somebody goes to war and kills somebody and they have post traumatic stress. That's almost the only context that we hear it in. And yeah, our soldiers have PTSD. Can you
Mhm.
get PTSD from medically induced trauma? Uh-huh. You can.
You know, I think that is one of the biggest reasons that I'm doing this podcast is because there are so many people who have actually experienced medical trauma, but because there isn't a well-known word or phrase for it, they oftentimes don't understand that that's what's happening. They had this experience, and now they're really anxious all the time, or they can't sleep, or they can't go back to the doctor. And yeah, I think it's so important for people to understand that that is a real thing.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure people wonder, well, you've met with Jesus. He can fix anything. Why can't he fix that in you? Why do you have to have medicine? Why do you have to have counseling? And I think God gives us medicine. He gives
Mhm.
us counselors who have a heart for this. I started my counseling about 5 weeks ago, and I got into a program that has been started at the Health Science Center, which is a large hospital here in Winnipeg. And this hospital has dedicated a whole unit to people suffering from medically induced trauma. That's
Mhm.
all they deal with. So when I go in there, I can walk in and everybody who sees me knows that's why she's here. And I can look at somebody and I know that's why they're here because that's all they deal with, which to me was phenomenal.
Yeah, when you shared that with me, was I was that I think that's amazing. First of all, that there is a recognition
Mm-hmm.
of that, that it's real and it's within the hospital that they're recognizing it and they're treating people who
Right.
were traumatized in that hospital, and not necessarily because of something anyone was doing to try to hurt them,
Mm-hmm.
but in having our lives saved, oftentimes there is trauma that comes along with that.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that like? What is the experience for you doing those groups?
Um, we're just now getting into the meat of it.
Hmm.
Um, Again, I was surprised when you went into breathing therapy because right away, that's one of the first things they taught me, and it's been a very useful tool. If I have anxiety coming on and I can feel it, I can just I either tap
Hmm.
or I just breathe or I do both. And it's very calming and it does work. It's amazing. It does help to calm me down. But the process that they're going to do next with me is they're going to take me through the trauma. And
Hmm.
instead of forgetting about it after that, going through the trauma, I know I'm going to be anxious as I'll get out. They're going to take me through it. And while I'm in it, teach me that I don't have to forget about it to not be anxious. Teach
Hmm.
me to deal with what it is I'm feeling at that time.
Hmm.
So it's a big step, scary as anything I can think of. Um, but it's something that I look forward to because I see the progress I've made already,
Hmm.
and I want more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went from a very fun-loving person. I'm still fun-loving, but I went from a very gregarious, outgoing. Um, I can fly a plane. I've got my pilot's license. I jumped out of airplanes. Anything exciting, I loved. And now
Yeah.
everything scares me.
Yeah.
I have a fear factor now, which is probably a good thing because I've never had it before. Um, but I don't particularly want it to be debilitating. I want to be able to do what I want to do. If I want to go, you know, jump out of a plane, then I want to be able to do it. Now, I'm almost 70 years old. I'm not going to jump out of a plane, but I'm just using that as a reference point to how I've lived my life and
Yeah.
to kind of a crippling fear now almost. So I look forward
Yeah.
to gaining that back.
And I think, Deborah, what you're talking about is such a common experience. And so
Mm-hmm.
I want people listening to know it is so common for trauma and medical trauma to create this fear especially in places where there wasn't fear before.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think you are incredibly brave for
Mm.
doing this work. For like you said, even showing up, right? Even showing up that first day was incredibly brave.
Mm-hmm.
And I can feel from you this power of, this is what I want, and these are the steps I need to take to get there. And so even though I'm terrified, I'm taking these steps, and that's amazing.
My traumatic experience did leave me with a colostomy bag.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of people in my area, I think in every area, who all they would like to do is talk to somebody else who has an ostomy. And
Yes.
so I've started a therapy group. It's more of a friendship group, I would call it, where people
Mhm.
who have ostomies can get together. And we're going to meet once a month, just at a Smitty's or any kind of a restaurant or anything, and just share our
Yeah.
experience with our ostomies. And I live in a condo complex, and we have a beautiful outdoor pool here. And there's people who have ostomies say, I can't swim because I'm afraid. It's waterproof. You don't have to be afraid. I'm trying to do all the things that I used to and that I love. And the first few times in the pool, it's unnerving, but you get through it. And now I don't even think about it. I just dive in and, you know, so
I love that. And Deborah, so it sounds like it is an in-person group. It's not an online group
it's
for
an
people listening.
infection.
It's in person. So, if someone were to want to, in your area, who wanted to join your group,
Mhm.
is there a way that they could reach out to you? Do you have a website, or do you want me to share something in the show notes they can?
You can share my email. Certainly that's fine. Yeah. And if
Okay.
there's anybody from this area who can make a meeting, that'd be great. Everybody's welcome. You don't have to have a stoma. You can know somebody who has a stoma, or you can have a husband or a wife or a child with stoma, that you just
Mhm.
need that support of other people who've gone through it and who are
Mhm.
living with that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I just
everybody's
think
welcome.
that the support and the connection in this healing is crucial.
There's a camaraderie with, I think, people
Yeah.
who have gone through what I have gone through, and other lots of other people have gone through it. And
Yeah.
it's like going into a doctor's office, and the male doctor is telling you, "Oh, yes, I know what that feels like when you're pregnant."
Right.
No, you don't. I'm sorry. I don't care how good a physician you are. You don't know what it feels like. And when you have people who are in the same boat, if you will, who have had the same experiences, then I think then you've got that camaraderie.
Yeah.
You've got that intimacy between two people who share a same experience.
Yes, there is like a depth of knowing that comes from lived experience that
Mm-hmm.
can never be
Yeah.
taught,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think gathering with people who get it is so beautiful. I also think that, Deborah, it's amazing that you are, this seems like it's part of your healing journey, is to provide this space for people to pull people
It
together.
definitely
And
is.
yeah,
It
I
definitely
think
is.
that's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. We've got about 14 people now. So,
Yeah.
and I didn't know anybody in the area who had an ostomy. You don't think you're the only one, but you just don't get to know those people,
Yeah.
unless you reach out as I have and find them, or they find
Yeah.
you. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think
I,
that's amazing.
I just want to say something maybe in closing. I don't know how our time is doing. I haven't looked, but I just want to say to people that this is not a dress rehearsal. This is our life. We don't get to do it over again. We don't get to do it better or faster or harder or stronger, or and I want to say that we need to live every day as if it is our last, because it very well could be. And I've always done this, but I'm probably a little better at it now, of telling people how I feel now. I don't want to read your obituary and having had not told you something. I
Mhm.
have friends and I see them, I hug them. I say, you know what? I love you. I care
Mhm.
about you. I love this about you. Not things I would say at a funeral necessarily, but just anything that I
Right.
feel is personal and I feel is important for me to say to them. I say it now. I've
Mhm.
always been somewhat like that, but now even more so. Um, I'm more to that degree. Um, Live for today and love yourself,
Yeah.
because you are loved. There's no doubt
Yeah.
about that.
I think that's so beautiful, for people listening to think, tell the people in your life that you love them, tell them why you love them,
Mm-hmm.
and do the same for yourself.
Yep.
Show yourself that same love.
Mm-hmm.
You know, right now, take 5 seconds to think about something you love about yourself.
Mm.
Send that love straight to your own heart. Hmm.
Life is good.
It is. Even though there are hard things that happen, there is also so much beauty. And I just think this conversation with you today, Deborah, is the perfect example of that. Even in the midst of the pain and the terror, there was also this experience of absolute, complete love, and that everything was okay and that everything would be okay. And you had two of your children holding your hand for
Mm-hmm.
hours. And when you shared that, it made me think about how many times you probably held them for hours when they were young and they were sick.
Yeah.
I just think so much about the how important and impactful sharing love with other people is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what's coming up in this conversation with you. And I feel so
Yeah.
incredibly grateful for that, and really grateful that you shared your story.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure all the way.